Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Courtenay-Alberni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise today on Bill S-231 and an act to amend the Canada Evidence Act and the Criminal Code. Mr. Speaker, I'd first like to thank the member from Louis Saint Laurent for bringing forward this bill. He was an esteemed journalist in his past life, and so he knows this very well. Mr. Speaker, as I was preparing my thoughts on this bill today, I was hoping to talk just a little bit about a friend of mine who is a local reporter on Vancouver Island, Keven Drews. Keven has been a pillar of journalism on Vancouver Island and the West Coast for over 20 years, and he's really shown me what strong, unflinching journalism looks like. Unfortunately, Kevin's fighting a brutal 10-year battle with cancer. He's in the hospital today, and he's joining us, watching us talk about this very important bill. So I'm certain that he'd be happy to know that we're here to be fighting for freedom of speech and fighting for journalists. And when I met Keven, the first time I met him, it's hard to believe, but I met him surfing, of course, because I was in Tofino, and he was a cadet, a real true Canadian, committed to Canada, and committed to becoming a journalist that could tell a very important story for coastal people and our stories. And as a journalist, he started at our local paper, telling our stories, and he moved up to become the Alberni Valley Times reporter and editor, and down to Peninsula Daily News and over to Port Angeles, Washington, and before he got sick. And then he started his own paper, the westcoaster.ca, and he started telling a very important story. That's the West Coast story, to make sure that people across our country heard our story. And when Keven got sick and he was really on the way up in his career, he ended up working for the Canadian Press so he could be close to the hospitals in Vancouver. But wherever you saw Keven, he would stop and try to hear what was important, what was happening in our communities. And his late father or his mother, Louise, would be with him, who are very proud of Keven, or his wife, Yvette, and his kids, Tristan and Ellery. Keven always made time to hear our important story. His priorities were to ensure that the people in our stories of coastal people, that economic justice and social justice and environmental justice and Indigenous people's rights were being told. And some of those stories are difficult stories. They're painful stories. Keven interviewed me many times, and I always respected his sources. I respected that he had to protect his sources so that we could get the story right. And, he covered things like, really bad accidents, suicide, corruption and scandals and things that really are difficult stories to cover. And again, it was the confidentiality that earned Keven that respect that he deserves, and so he could cover all of these stories and these difficult issues. And I really acknowledge journalists across our country for the passion, the caring that they take to make sure that they get it right, to go out and build trust within our communities. So before I dive into the rest of my speech, I just want to thank Keven. I know that a lot of people have had to go home to their ridings, and I appreciate that. But maybe I'll just ask the members to join me in acknowledging this great man that is fought for journalism, fought for people in our communities and for our country.